Hi students, we're going to be going over lesson 4.02 and we're going to be talking about biomes in this lesson video. So the definition that we're going to use for biomes is that they are large geographical regions or areas that have a very unique set of temperature as well as precipitation. And when we talk about precipitation, we're going to look specifically at rainfall. Okay, so again, they are large areas that have a unique temperature and rainfall, and those two things really determine what type of plants and animals will live in that specific biome. The existence of biomes really depends heavily on the abiotic factor that exists in the biome. So, for example, if we were to look at a biome like desert, we could look at the different abiotic factors that are in a desert. For example, if we were to look at the temperature and the amount of rainfall in a desert, we could say the temperature would be very hot, right? And the rainfall would be very low, right? So this would be for a desert. But if we looked at another type of biome, let's say like a tropical rainforest, right, like that we see right here, we see that in a rainforest, the temperatures are probably going to be more warm, right? But the rainfall is going to be very high. So there's going to be constant rainfall throughout the year. And that allows for plants that are very green, very lush, and really encourages a diverse amount of species in that environment. So again, we see two different types of biomes, a desert and the rainforest. They have different temperature and rainfall, and that really characterizes them uniquely from one another. Okay, so again, one of the ways that we define what a biome is by looking at the temperature as well as the precipitation or rainfall of a biome. Okay, so if we look here, just as we talked about, for example, in the desert, we know that the desert we see right here, it's going to be on the spectrum for temperature as very high, right? The desert has very high temperature. But if we look at the rainfall, we see that it's very low, right? Because the y-axis here describes the average annual precipitation, how much it rains every year. And we see that compared to all the other biomes, the desert is definitely one of the lowest. Okay. But if we look at the tropical rainforest, right, we see right here, we see that it does have higher temperatures like the desert, however, the rainfall is very high. And so, again, different amounts of precipitation causes there to be different types of organisms in both of these biomes. Okay, so we could talk a little bit more about climate. And so climate really determines where different species live. So if we were to think about like a polar bear or panda or koala, these are all different types of animals that need to live in different places because they're adapted in different ways. For example, we have koalas, and they live in dry forests in Australia because that's where you can find its main food source, which are eucalyptus trees. Pandas live in temperate forests in China because their food source is the bamboo. And then we have polar bears, and they live in the Arctic, and they actually live in a place where they're able to camouflage with their white fur, and that allows them to sneak up on their prey. Okay, so again, three organisms that live in three different climates that really. So what's important for you to see here is how a biome is defined. Remember that we are defining a biome by its climate. And when we talk about climate, we're talking about both temperature as well as precipitation. So when we talk about biomes, there are actually two different large groups that we can place the different biomes into. One is terrestrial and the other one is aquatic biomes. So the terrestrial biomes are the land biomes. So we have many different types of terrestrial biomes that we're going to be going over. So for example, we have savannas and we also have temperate grasslands. These are two different types of terrestrial or land biomes. We're going to go over each of them in detail in the subsequent slides. Okay, so the first terrestrial biome we're going to go over is the rainforest. And you can see shaded in green here, all of these are areas that are considered rainforests. And so we see for the rainforest, they have warmer temperatures, lots of precipitation, their soil is moist and poor. Vegetation, there's lots of broadleaf trees, shrubs, and vines, and there's a huge variety of animals present as well. And you could see lots of water and very lush vegetation. Tropical rainforests, if you remember in the previous slide, you could see them along the Earth's equator, making it very warm. And they also receive a considerable amount of rain. It's the most biologically diverse biome, and they're home to thousands of plants and animal species. Some that are included are orchids, palms, vines, poison arrow frogs, sloths, and monkeys. So again, another picture of that very green, lush environment. Another terrestrial biome is a temperate forest. So the temperate forest is a little bit cooler, has less rain than the rainforest. The soil is moderately rich. There are lots of trees, and there are bears, deers, foxes, and raccoons that are present. And so again, the area that's shaded green are the areas where you can find temperate forests. Temperate forests have long summers. Then another terrestrial biome called the taiga, and the winters are not as severe. Temperate forests have deciduous trees, and those are trees that lose their leaves in the fall. And some examples of that would be the beech, oak, and maple tree. There's also a variety of organisms that live there, deer, moose, mice, bears, and owls that live in these forests. We also have the grassland, and the grassland really have a variety of temperatures, right? It can be very cold, but it also can be more warm as well. There's less precipitation, great soil, lots of dense grasses, and there are buffaloes, coyotes, and prairie dogs in these areas. And we see there is like a variety of places that grasslands exist as well. Some examples of the grasslands could be savannas, right? And savannas are tropical grasslands because they receive more rainfall. But we also have other types of grasslands called the temperate grasslands, and that's more of like what you can find in the Midwest in the US. And this is where you can find like wildflower and grasses, lots of different birds, antelope, bison, and prairie dogs. We also have the desert, and the desert is known to be, in some cases, cold, but also pretty warm too. Very little rainfall, very dry. There's not great soil, and most of the vegetation are succulent plants that are adapted to the dry environment. And the animals, lots of reptiles like lizards, snakes, and as well as foxes. Desert covers about 20% of the Earth's surface, which is quite a bit. They receive very little rain, less than 10 inches in a year. Some deserts actually don't have rain at all for a year or even longer. And so all of the organisms must be adapted to this very dry environment. So the types of organisms that you can find are lizards and snakes, foxes, as well as some plants. We also have the taiga, and you see the taiga is found, if we were to say the equator was below here, we see that the taiga is far away from the equator, making it quite cold. And so you can see that there's very low temperatures. The soil is not very good. It's very acidic and poor. There's some trees, and there are also a variety of animals like moose, bears, wolves, and lynxes. The taiga is characterized by having long, cold winters and short, cool summers. Um, and there's lots of coniferous trees, such as pine, fir, and cedar. So those would be trees that have cones on them. There are also a variety of animals and lots of different colorful birds. And we also have the tundra. So we see the tundra is even further north of the equator, so it's going to be even colder. Not a lot of rainfall, and the soil is similar to the taiga, but even worse, very acidic and very poor. So there's actually not a lot of vegetation or animals, or not a variety of those two. There's mosses, small woody plants, there's some caribou, lemmings, and snowshoe hares, but again, not a large variety. So you could see another picture here. One interesting thing about the tundra is that beneath the ground is a layer of soil called the permafrost, and that all actually stays frozen year round, and that's one of the reasons why there isn't that many different species of organisms that live in the tundra. So it's actually one of the least diverse regions of on Earth. So least diverse meaning low variety. Okay, and we also have the polar ice. So the polar ice we can find up here, and this would be one of the coldest biomes that exists. There's no yearly precipitation, very little. The soil is permafrost, very poor, so there's not a lot of vegetation. The vegetation that they do have would be something like algae, mosses, and shrubs, but again, very little. You can see in this picture, it looks almost all white. The animals that live there are well adapted to the environment. They're seals, penguins, and polar bears. So again, very low temperatures year round. Ice is present all the time, and it's the coldest biome on Earth. It's located at the north as well as the south poles. And because the temperatures are so low, there's very little plant life that exists, and animals, again, have to be adapted to dealing with those sub-zero temperatures. Okay, so those are all the terrestrial biomes. There are a lot of them, all of them with their unique climates, which is the temperature and rainfall. We also have our aquatic biomes. What's really cool that people don't really realize is that aquatic biomes actually make up 75% of the earth. And so you see here, we tend to focus on the land portions, the terrestrial portions of Earth, but if you look at all of this space right here, this is all water, and so you could see easily that these aquatic biomes really do take up the vast majority of the space on Earth. So one type of aquatic biome would be the freshwater biome. So the freshwater biome um, are things like rivers and lakes and streams, and they exist on every single continent, on every single latitude. So definitely many different types of rivers and lakes present. And there are unique organisms that make their home in these freshwater ecosystems, specifically different types of fish species, frogs, turtles, insect larvae, and even aquatic birds such as ducks and loons. Freshwater ecosystems also provide food for many land animals. So, because rivers and lakes and streams are close to land, a lot of land animals can go to these water sources in order to feed on animals that live in the water. We also have marine biomes, and marine biomes include different types of saltwater ecosystems. So they would have different organisms like crabs, lobsters, shrimps, mussels, whales, corals, algae, and a lot of different types of fish. Marine biomes really have different types of ecosystems like coral reefs, right? The open ocean, the ocean bottom, and intertidal zones. And they also have a thing called an estuary, okay? So this is found at the edge of the marine biome. So you can see here, we see the estuary is what you see right here, which is where you have fresh water and salt water mixing with one another. And what's cool about these estuaries is that it's really a critical place for the young of many marine animals. So as these young marine animals are maturing, they mature in these estuaries and then go ahead and transition into the salt water. Okay, so pretty much in this lesson, what we learned about were the different types of biomes. But the big takeaway that I want you to have is what a biome is. Remember, a biome is a large area um, that has a specific temperature as well as precipitation, and that determines what type of plants and animals are going to live there. And remember, we have two different types of biomes, like two big categories. One would be the terrestrial biome, which would be land, right? And then the other one would be the aquatic biomes, which would be water. So the important vocabulary that you'll need to know for this lesson is just biome. And remember, it's that large area, and some examples would be rainforest, desert, or tundra. And that large area has specific types of plants and animals that live there. And really what that's dependent on are those two things, which would be temperature and rainfall.